So we are finally at the finale of Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade, guys. Don't forget to check out part 1 and part 2 if this is the first video that you're seeing. And as always, thank you so much to GamerSupps for sponsoring this video series. Use my code NOOP in the link in the description to get 10% off your GamerSupps order, or support the channel for free by getting some free samples if you're a new customer, and use my code anyway. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this series of videos, and let's get right back into the story. Racing down the mountain highway at top speeds, Ichichi breaks multiple traffic laws in an attempt to get Yuji, Megami, Rindo, and Nobara to the front of the Grand Kyushu barrier as soon as possible. Unfortunately for them, on their next turn, Ichichi is flung off the road out of nowhere, and the group is sent tumbling down the cliffside all the way to the bottom. In full video game anime logic though, miraculously, no one is injured in this accident. But with the car left damaged beyond repair, the students might have no other choice but to begin this operation on foot. Considering that from the location they were just derailed comes an approaching horde of cursed minions, it's pretty obvious all of this was Rosetsu's doing in order to slow them down anyway. So the students rush towards their goal, leaving Ichichi behind to search for Principal Yaga and Panda's car. And speaking of which, their car, which was directly behind Ichichi's, was also ambushed off the road. However, unlike the others, the one waiting for them after the wreckage is the former Fukuoka High principal, Kensuke Nagino. Realizing that none of this madness will end unless he finishes his business with Nagino, Yaga asks Panda to forgive him, but Yaga needs Panda to carry on alone from here. And Panda shakes his head, laughing at his father figure, telling Yaga it's written all over his face that he's still trying to save Nagino and bring him back to their side. And choked up, Yaga can only, once again, apologize. But Panda reminds him no one on the team would ever hold a grudge against him for something so human. Acknowledging his son's maturity, Panda begins to clear a path through all the approaching cursed spirits, letting Yaga through to face Nagino himself. Finally catching up with the former principal, Nagino mockingly asks his old friend how easy it could be to leave their students behind, but Yaga corrects him, declaring Yaga students aren't so weak as to lose to cursed spirits of that degree. And finally alone, Yaga can confront Nagino about how he could possibly align himself with the curse that killed Sarah. But Nagino is quick to remind Yaga it wasn't Rosetsu that killed Sarah, it was Jujutsu High, considering them both equally as evil. Nagino is happy that Yaga seems willing to take their time and talk things out, as this is the perfect time to let him in on a little secret Nagino's been keeping. Lifting a hand up to his eye patch and removing it, a cursed black eye is revealed to have taken root in Nagino's face. Yaga is shocked, looking at the dark black abyss staring back at him, and Nagino says it hurts to be looked at like a monster by his best friend, revealing that this cursed eye is exactly why he partnered up with Rosetsu in the first place. And we fade away into a flashback of Nagino's past 26 years ago, just after Sarah was executed and Rosetsu was supposedly exorcised. The broken Nagino decides to stay in Fukuoka alone, unable to face Tokyo Jujutsu High ever again after what they did to the love of his life. Angry and without purpose, Nagino relentlessly hunts down cursed spirits and exorcises them, not for justice or Jujutsu High, but because it was the only outlet he could find to take his anger out on. Somehow, on the seemingly never-ending path of violence, by random chance, Nagino once again came across the special grade curse known as Rosetsu deep in the Kyushu mountains. In utter disbelief, Nagino is speechless at Rosetsu still being alive. But even more surprisingly, the curse reveals that he's actually been searching for Nagino for quite some time. Obviously though, seeing the curse responsible for his lover's death drives Nagino into a blind rage, and the sorcerer repeatedly charges at the curse with attacks, while Rosetsu just dodges, doing its best to try and coax Nagino into actual conversation. But Rosetsu quickly begins to get annoyed. Nagino refuses to listen, Nagino claiming he has no need to give a cursed spirit, especially this one, any time of day. In an attempt to relate to Nagino on some kind of personal level, Rosetsu explains that if this is because Nagino misses Sarah, Rosetsu can empathize with him there, as if anyone can understand how tragic of a loss she was. Rosetsu says it's him, which honestly just angers Nagino more, thinking the curse is making fun of him. But instead of reason, this time Rosetsu chooses to merely just show Nagino why he should listen, using a portion of his cursed energy to conjure up a mirror replica of Sarah right before Nagino's eyes. The widowed man utterly and tragically mentally defeated at this point, falls to his knees at the sight of his late wife, begging to know if it's really her. But Rosetsu snaps her away the moment Nagino sees a glimpse of her smile, claiming that's all he can offer for now, but he hopes that's enough to get Nagino to lower his guard. And without hesitation, as he gets back up, Nagino declares outright whatever Rosetsu needs him to do, he'll help, promising to play along with recreating Rosetsu's grand Kyushu barrier plan so long as he can be with Sarah again, creating the very binding vow that locks us into this crisis situation we're in now. And in present day, Nagino finishes his story by apologizing to Yaga for using an old friend and his students like this, but that he has to understand Nagino would do anything to be with Sarah again. However, after hearing all of this, Yaga refuses to sympathize, seeing Nagino for the delusional fool he's truly become, reminding Nagino that as a Jujutsu sorcerer, he should know better than anyone it's an absolute impossibility to revive the dead. But this makes Nagino laugh in Yaga's face, as he tells his friend not to be so confident, especially considering Rosetsu has already fulfilled his end of the bargain. Yaga is confused, but Nagino changes the topic, telling Yaga he should be ashamed of himself for ignoring Sarah, as she's actually been here the entire time. Suddenly, a sinister cursed energy emerges into view that Yaga was unable to really make out before. Finally noticing the bulging, pulsating mass of flesh that has wrapped its disgusting tentacles all around Nagino's body, suctioning itself to his chest. With large beady eyes and a wide gaping maw, Yaga looks back in horror as the reflection of the creature appears on his sunglasses. It's almost as if seeing his friend in such a sorry state leaves him speechless, outright unable to process the fact his former friend would really believe this thing could be his lover. With multiple emotions overflowing, Yaga yells out to his friend in utter desperation, demanding to know just how far Rosetsu has made Nagino fall. But Nagino shrugs off this heartfelt reaction, just asking Yaga to come and join their side, recompleting their old trio and getting back to better times. Knowing it's impossible now to ever bring Nagino back with how far he's gone, Yaga accepts this fate and begins to release his full power, letting Nagino know it's time for all of this madness to end. And honestly, I really gotta say, I'm more than willing to take a copyright claim here. This is one of the absolute best scenes in the entire game, and considering Masamichi Yaga's voice actor won't really get very many big moments to shine in the main series, I feel like I'm depriving you of the amount of effort he clearly put into this. What's meant to be a battle to the death between two old friends. A scene that, even for just mobile game avatars and text boxes, the voice acting and the emotions in this scene are undeniable. I would never be able to describe it as good as it comes off on its own. So please hit that like button and subscribe, because I'm just gonna let this play.
私は嬉しかったんだ。お前が過去を乗り越え、前に進み始めてくれたと。だが、違った。お前は今も過去にとらわれ、26年前と同じ場所に立ち止まり続けている。違うな、正道。俺はずっと前へ進み続けているさ。サラと過ごす未来のために。光月は死んだ。俺たちはあの時救えなかった。お前の隣にいるのはただの呪霊でしか。知ったような口を聞くんじゃねえよ。ここにいるのは紛れもなくサラだ。あの頃と同じように俺を律してくれる。あの頃と同じように俺に笑いかけてくれる。そんなものはまやかしに過ぎない。老絶に頭をいじられてイカれているんだ、お前は。俺にとってはサラだけが本物で他の全てがまやかしだ。お前に何と言われようと揺るぎはしない。 だったらそんな考え事を叩き壊してやる凪野
Yaga moves in for the final blow. He prepares to take both Nagino and the parasite out in a single attack. But just as Yaga prepares to launch, the parasite throws itself between the two friends, making Nagino panic, crying out almost nonsensically for Yaga to stop and never take Sarah away from him. And for some reason, in that split moment, a warm, familiar feeling comes over Yaga, reminding him of his old friend Sarah. Even though, in his heart of hearts, he knows it to not be true, he can't help but feel her presence in this one single second, making Yaga hesitate. Just long enough for the parasite to seize an opening and stab its multiple tendrils directly through Yaga's body, critically wounding and incapacitating the principal. As he drops to the ground, Yaga curses himself for falling for such a dumb trick, not knowing why something like sentimentality would get in the way at a time like this. Having the time to recompose himself, Nagino looks down at his injured friend, deciding that if this truly is the ultimatum for them, he might as well take Yaga's life now and not drag things out longer. But as he's distracted, a loud yell echoes out from behind Nagino. As he turns around, out from the forest charges Saki Rindo, who with a blood-curdling war cry, throws her cursed energy charged fist at the cursed parasite at full strength, slamming into it with purely raw force and rocketing it high speed far off into the mountain range. Disheveled, Nagino cries out for his lover, turning to his former student and calling her a bastard. Nagino charges up and readies his attacks in fury, but the surprisingly calm and at peace Rindo inhales and exhales, telling her sensei that she'll be settling this score here and now. Much to everyone's surprise, Nagino is completely outmatched here, unable to keep up with Rindo's significantly higher level of curse output, demanding to know why Rindo has so much more cursed energy than normal, which makes Rindo shake her head as she sadly reminds her teacher that he was the one that helped her discover how her curse technique works in the first place. Catastrophe Reversal Curse turns pain into power. And because he's so far gone now, Nagino can't even remember that. Obviously going through extreme inner turmoil as she battles what was supposed to be her adopted father, Nagino reminds Rindo she never meant anything to him in the first place, so she should really stop caring, as her and Yuki were merely just means to an end. But Rindo rejects this, which confuses Nagino. She tells her sensei that no matter what he says to her, she could never not be grateful to him. Whatever Nagino wants to claim his reasons for raising her were, that does not change the fact that without him, and she most certainly would never have become who she is now. Letting Nagino know that even if this was all some illusion for him, he could never take away the realness she feels from her memories. And almost as if everything in that very moment clicked, Nagino remembers what he just said to Yaga not even a moment ago, that Sarah would always be real to him, even if it's just an illusion for everyone else. And if someone tried to take her away, then everything else was the illusion. No one could stop this from being real for him. Realizing that even though Nagino never meant to, he imparted his very own belief system into his students. Ironically, just like Yaga told Nagino he would, way back before all of this began. Realizing that Nagino could never reject Sarah, just as Rindo would never reject him, he finally comes to terms with this. Dropping his hands to his sides and relinquishing all of his cursed energy at once, Nagino looks down to the ground, unable to watch as his student charges up her last attack. Nagino, just loud enough for her to hear, tells Rindo that she's right in what she believes, and that it's great she was able to come to such a conclusion on her own. Rindo, who nods in acknowledgement of her sensei's words, thanks Nagino one final time for everything he's done. And as the impending doom of Saki Rindo's final blow heads right for him, Nagino can't help himself but smile, fully ready to take accountability for his actions, so long as it's what his student believes is right. With all said and done, Rindo and Yaga look over the unconscious Nagino in concern, both of them apologizing for causing the other trouble, admitting it was an emotional moment for the two, and neither meant to intrude on the other's closure. However, Yaga realizes that if Rindo's here, it must mean she got separated from Yuji and the others. And Ichichi arrives just on time to explain all of them went off alone to find Rosetsu's hideout on foot. Meanwhile, inside the Kyushu barrier's epicenter, the final amount of energy has been gathered to complete its deployment ritual. Upon activation, suddenly a surge of cursed energy is released, transforming the barrier's central antenna into a twisting, winding crimson tree, as a sinister miasma begins to flood throughout the entire mountain range. Rosetsu's claws grow wide, and the barrier continues to expand by the minute, making Rosetsu launch into hysterics as he declares his victory. Ranting about how all of Kyushu will soon be his domain, he raves wildly about the idea of reducing all of humanity to livestock, harvesting them by the thousands to pluck forth the ultimate curse technique, stripping them of everything and anything he can for his own. And during this tirade, behind Rosetsu sits the king's vessel, its monstrous power pumping the Grand Barrier full of massive amounts of fuel. However, compared to its master, it looks less than amused, almost too similar to its original personality. The king's vessel watches on in pure boredom as the scene fades to black. While Panda stays behind with Yaga, Rindo manages to catch up to Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara just as the barrier ritual completes, only being able to watch as its toxic miasma spreads throughout the whole area. Despite everyone's worries that they already failed, Megumi seems to be confident there's no way this could be the complete Kyushu barrier he's heard about, claiming it's much too unimpressive right now to be in its full state. Assuming this is one of multiple stages, they do their best to steel their nerves and carry on, knowing that while it would have been better if they stopped Rosetsu before deployment at all, if they still have time, they're going to need to make the most of it. With the knowledge they have about Yuki's curse technique, they know there has to be a central point acting as the barrier's cornerstone somewhere. And with that in mind, they set their sights on finding and destroying it to hopefully take the barrier down with it. Rindo wonders just what they'll do about Rosetsu after all of that, but Megumi reminds them that stopping the barrier is their highest priority, especially considering they're directly in the belly of the beast, so they need to avoid unnecessary combat until all of that is taken care of. At the same time, able to sense their presence inside his territory, Rosetsu scoffs at the stupidity of Jujutsu Hide to try and fight him under these circumstances, laughing at how similar this is shaping up to be to the war 26 years ago. Rosetsu can't help but be intrigued by a sorcerer's ability to charge in despite the impossible odds that face them, all in the name of exercising some curse, wondering just how long it will take until all of them fall deep inside what is now the land of curses, which proves to be just as agonizing and toxic as Yaga described. The four students forced to fight off the hordes of curse minions that stand in their way under intense atmosphere, almost as if an extra layer of gravity was placed over them. However, surprisingly, much to Rosetsu's shock, the students are able to withstand the pressure and continue fighting, as Rindo admits their quote-unquote plan is actually working. Cutting back to reveal that before the students infiltrated the barrier, Yaga had actually given each of them a shard of the last cornerstone Yuki had created in his attempt to save Yuji just before being kidnapped. Because curse technique boost night hunt, or prayer formation technique, whatever you really want to call it, has strict conditions as to not buff or debuff its own user if those that enter the barrier are holding a piece of the user's cursed item, that same rule should apply to them. Meaning, as long as the four sorcerers keep that shard of Yuki's final vow on their person, the effects of Rosetsu's barrier, which ultimately belongs to Yuki at the end of the day, will be lessened for them. Although Megumi isn't sure how long these small fragments can last, especially with the barrier growing even stronger by the minute, but it gives them just enough of an edge to continue fighting their way through Rosetsu's forces for now. And they do, paving deep enough of a path into the mountain to start to worry the special grade. And despite his hesitation, Rosetsu sees no other choice but to hasten the speed of the barrier's expansion, commanding the king's vessel to stop holding back and release all of its energy into the cornerstone to put the finishing touches on early. Although the king's vessel seems annoyed at the thought of taking orders, it obliges, as a powerful fluctuation forces its way through the cornerstone's roots, channeling throughout the barrier and even making Rosetsu shudder beneath its ferocity. The curse shakes with pure excitement, making Rosetsu cheer as this extreme strength begins to flood through all of his minions as well, boosting their curse energy outputs and size to become even more deadly than before. A power-up immediately felt by Yuji, Megumi, Nobara, and Rindo, who could not only see the overwhelming negative energy whirl around chaotically, but also witness the cursed minions begin to mutate and look even more like the King of Curses themselves. A presence that Yuji and Megumi clearly feel, as it snakes its influence throughout every corner of the barrier. And for the sorcerers who are already against an uphill battle, this just makes their venture into the barrier even tougher. However, against all odds, the four of them are able to fight deep enough to begin to see the massive crimson tree in the horizon. But just as hope enters their eyes and they rejoice, a dark-toned voice immediately carves out any sense of relief they may have felt. The students turning to see the 10 Shadows vessel, also having further mutated and gained strength from the king's influence, standing in their way. With no idea how long is left until the Grand Barrier's completion, Fushiguro urges the others to go on without him, as this curse was always his responsibility. And as if this had all been rehearsed, Rindo, Yuji, and Nobara make a break past the 10 Shadows vessel without hesitating, putting faith in their friend and not even giving him a look back as they continue to make their way towards the barrier's core. Megumi knows that if he can accomplish exercising this vessel now, not only will he return to full strength, but they'll be able to make a massive dent in Rosetsu's guard. Making a direct one-on-one challenge, the Shadow Vessel tells Megumi to come and try him, both of them clapping their hands together to make the sign for the Thunderbird Nue as they summon forth their Shikigami. However, because the Shadow Vessel can create multiple Nue at once, no matter how hard Megumi tries, he is incapable of even fighting back, especially with the power of Sukuna making the curse significantly stronger. The vessel calls Megumi in embarrassment to the 10 Shadows technique, demanding to know if he's ever going to actually participate in this fight, and if he should just finish things now. But just as things were getting boring, suddenly a humongous quake shakes the whole mountain, stopping everyone in their tracks, and making both Megumi and the vessel stare up to the sky, as the cursed miasma begins to intensify even further across the barrier. The two shadow users realizing what this means simultaneously, that the Grand Kyushu barrier has reached its second and intermediate stage of preparation. While all of this is happening within the barrier, outside in the suburbs that surround the main Kyushu mountain, Miwa, Momo, and the other Kyoto sorcerers have been working to clear out the civilian areas of Rosetsu's minions. After slaying all of the enemies in a single part of the town, Momo and Miwa make plans to move towards the next recon location, when suddenly, they too feel the intensity of the Grand Barrier grow and spread its influence further. Both of them looking up to see the veil begin to crawl over even the town itself, signaling to them that the Tokyo sorcerers might have actually failed the mission. Even worse, the evacuation of civilians hasn't been completed, meaning as the cursed energy's dense atmosphere weighs heavily on the area, even ordinary people become afflicted by the miasma's toxin, some falling ill or even causing car accidents due to falling unconscious. Momo and Miwa jump on the witch's broom to make an escape, as a massive fatigue begins to plague their body and minds. They push themselves to outrace the edge of the barrier, making Miwa wonder what they could even possibly do at this point to stop all this. However, all Momo can do is apologize, as she grows so weak she can no longer maintain flight, losing consciousness and dropping both of them to the ground with a high fall. At the same time, back at the outskirts of Kyushu's mountain, Ichichi also falls ill and collapses as the barrier expands. Yaga is concerned about everyone's failure, but suddenly he's interrupted with the awakening of Nagino, who, after discovering the cursed spirit that was substituting for Sarah had been lost, perhaps even forever, he actually surprisingly seems to accept this, and for some reason even comes off as having some kind of change of heart. Nagino asks Yaga in their desperation to release him from his restraints, saying they no longer have a reason to not trust him, and that now he's the only one that can help them, as he is the only one that knows how to stop this. However, after everything that's happened, Panda and Yaga are hesitant, and they're unsure if Nagino has truly earned this kind of trust. But before we can know what happens, we cut back to the 3 remaining students, Yuji, Rindo, and Nobara, as they're continuing to fight their way to the barrier's center. But with the progression of the Grand Barrier reaching worse levels, Rindo worries if there's even a point to continuing now. Thankfully, Nobara is still confident they haven't reached completion, and knowing they're on more than borrowed time at this point, she commands Itadori to stop letting them hold him back and make way full speed for the cornerstone. Yuji, hesitant, knows full well only one of them needs to make it in time to shatter the barrier, so he says he'll agree only on the condition that Nobara and Rindo both promise not to die. The girls immediately telling Yuji not to underestimate them, saying that he should make that exact same promise. And with that, once again, the sorcerers are split off. Yuji entering breakneck pace and ricocheting off, leaving Nobara and Rindo in the dust. However, before the girls even get a second to breathe, a humongous horde of Sukuna spawn make their appearance, forcing the 2 of them to stay and fend them off so none of them can follow Itadori. Let's rewind a bit though, as we return to the battle between Fushiguro and the 10 Shadows vessel right where we left off. As the vessel brags about the Grand Barrier's progression, Megumi is able to parse out at least that this is only the second of 3 phases in its deployment. With the knowledge that there is still a chance to stop this, Megumi finally decides it's time to fight more recklessly, abandoning defense for offense and calling out Divine Dog to start getting serious. However, even though Megumi is finally able to keep up pace and close the distance with his opponent, with the Shadow Vessel's increased durability from the field advantage, it barely takes any damage from his attacks. And with one last swipe, one of the vessel's Nue ripped Megumi high into the air, ascending at intense speeds with full intention of nosediving back downwards. While Megumi struggles and he makes desperate pleas for the bird to stop and release him, weirdly enough, after the right amount of effort, the Nue actually does respond to Megumi's command, lowering and safely placing the sorcerer on the ground, which shocks Megumi and only serves to annoy the Shadow Vessel, who hasn't yet seemed to figure out what exactly just happened. However, with his quick intuition, Megumi correctly deduces that he was actually able to reclaim ownership over the Shikigami just by adding a bit of his own cursed energy back to its core. Intellectualizing this as the vessel's technique merely being an extension of Megumi's own, and considering it's even powered by sapping him of energy in general, by putting his quote-unquote essence back into the Shikigami, Megumi can actually regain control, even though he's not the original summoner. Well, technically by his logic, he is the original summoner, but you get what I mean, right? Now, knowing a fatal flaw in Cursed Technique Snatch's design, Megumi changes his attitude from worried to cocky, arrogantly taunting the vessel into trying to attack him again, but this time at full strength, claiming that if the vessel gives Megumi enough time, he'll easily be able to overcome such a one-trick pony. And since the Shadow Vessel was growing bored of the games anyway, it obliges Megumi's request and sicks all of its Nue clones on Fushiguro at once, with full intentions of finishing the fight. But as Megumi is swallowed by the horde of shadows, assumedly being torn asunder under the thunderous claws of multiple Nue, when the Shadow Vessel sighs in disappointment and calls the Nue off, none of the horde listens to him at all, which this time makes the vessel definitely notice something off. As all of the Nue peacefully flutter away from Megumi at once, seeming to float by his side in allegiance, the annoyed vessel demands to know what the hell is going on, still unable to read between the lines. And Megumi mocks it, since he finds it so simple, explaining that he wasn't hit by Nue's lightning because he didn't allow it to hit him, revealing that Rosetsu requires the stolen ability to maintain some connection with the original owner to siphon power, creating a vessel of 2 different cursed energies that can be fought over for control, meaning a user can regain full and total possession over their stolen technique with just the tiniest bit of cursed energy advantage. Much to the Shadow Vessel's bewilderment, absolutely dumbfounded that Cursed Technique Snatch could have such a terrible loophole, Megumi admits he doesn't really know what to tell the curse, and that who he really should should be complaining to is his boss. Now, with the tables turned completely, Megami mimics exactly what the Shadow Vessel said to the sorcerer earlier, wondering aloud how long the curse can last under assault from all these Nue at once, which makes the once proud vessel quiver, shouting as it's suddenly completely surrounded and stabbed at every angle by its own Nue's claws, being ripped into two halves and shattered into pure cursed residuals, being exorcised finally once and for all. As Megami's lost cursed energy instantly returns, Rosetsu feels a sudden loss of power throughout the barrier. Satisfied he was able to get his revenge, Megami tries to continue making his way through the barrier, but he can't help but fall to his knees, unfortunately sustaining way more damage in the previous battle than he had originally hoped, and finding himself barely able to carry on. However, even though he knows he'll be completely useless in battle, the knowledge Megami just found out about Curse Technique Snatch could give them the exact edge they need to destroy Rosetsu's barrier, giving him the inspiration to continue on. And speaking of Rosetsu, just as all of this is going down, we check back in with Itadori as he's sprinting full speed, dodging every horde of cursed minions that attempts to stop him on his way. Despite doing his best to ignore the small fry, Yuji does catch a whiff of a certain cursed energy that instantly makes him freeze in his tracks. He stops just as he enters a wide open field inside of the barrier, right before the Crimson Tree. And as he looks around at the empty, silent boss arena, Yuji casually calls out to the culprit, saying they might as well show themselves, and they're not able to hide from him anymore. Which, right on cue, Rosetsu emerges out from nothingness, laughing and complimenting Itadori on his sensory skills. Deciding to be open and honest for a moment, Rosetsu admits to Yuji that he's really the only person left out of everyone that he considers a threat. While losing the Shadow Vessel was a shame, Rosetsu knows Megami is essentially incapacitated now, and neither Nobara or Rindo are strong enough to stand against Rosetsu on their own. But this just makes Itadori stand strong, declaring he won't be wasting any more time then, and that it's time he finally exorcised Rosetsu, which excites the special grade, taunting Itadori and admitting, really? Because the longer they fight, the more powerful he'll become inside of the barrier. But almost as if Yuji completely ignored this, his maximum cursed energy flares out violently, choosing to only correct his words in response, saying he's not going to exorcise Rosetsu, he's going to be the one that kills Rosetsu. As Yuji and Rosetsu begin their battle, Rosetsu opts to simply play keep away and summon his cursed minions to do the attacking, annoying Yuji, who asks if Rosetsu really came all the way out here himself. Why is he just stalling? However, even though Itadori's strength is more than enough to take out the fodder of Sukuna buffed minions, he realizes being stranded out here by his lonesome, completely outnumbered, is probably not a good situation to be in no matter what the circumstances are. Especially if Rosetsu's main goal is just to keep Yuji away from the cornerstone. Thankfully, just as the cursed spirit gets a little cocky, a sudden pulsation strikes Rosetsu's senses, notifying him that Kensuke Nagino has entered the Grand Barrier. Rosetsu is baffled as to what could be the reason he's doing here at a time like this, which is just enough of a distraction for Yuji to land a rock throw right between Rosetsu's eyes. Snapping back to his senses, Rosetsu has no idea what Nagino is up to, but he's confident their binding vow will keep Nagino from doing anything critical to his plans, so Rosetsu places his focus back on Yuji. Meanwhile, Nobara and Rindo have managed to fight their way through to the center of the barrier, ironically, before Yuji ever even made it there. As they scan their surroundings, they're surprised to see the barrier's throne and core left completely empty and unattended. Rindo questions what might have happened to Yuji, but Nobara says they don't have time to worry about people that aren't here, and they need to put all of their focus into destroying the barrier before it gets too late. However, try as they might, even Rindo's recent surge of power isn't enough to make a dent in the cornerstone's exterior surface. Even when Rindo can leave a mark, it instantly regenerates as if nothing ever happened. Worst of all, their location is now getting snuffed out by patrol minions who have begun to surround them from every angle. And with no other choice, Nobara's only idea is to make their way inside of the cornerstone and hope there might be some kind of weak point further on inside. The two girls refuse to give up and make a break for the cavern that leads deeper into the Crimson Tree. And it's not too long before they realize they're just inside of what seems to be an actual living, breathing curse. Yet despite this gross, fleshy cave system seeming to sprawl far and wide, the massive amount of cursed minions inside that seem to be protecting the sanctum aren't the least bit discouraging. Because seeing how dire this situation is, they have to be on the right track as they ignite their cursed energy and continue fighting on through. Finally beginning to push their way into the innermost chamber, they're met with the grisly sight of Yuki Kaito's unconscious body intermingled with the most core roots of the cornerstone. Seeing her classmate, Rindo instantly makes a run for Yuki to try and remove him from the barrier. But before she can even get close, Nobara is yelling at her to dodge, as a massive hulking ogre sends its fist crash landing right to where the Fukuoka student was standing. Feeling the giant cursed creature's extreme aura and presence, Rindo and Nobara realize this might actually be the toughest curse Rosetsu's created yet. As the girl's situation intensifies, on Itadori's side, no matter how hard he tries, he can't seem to land any critical blows on Rosetsu, the curse just dodging and wasting more and more of the sorcerer's time. Knowing as long as he can just keep delaying Yuji, the Grand Barrier's completion can't be that far off. Though, as if once again shattering this illusion of confidence, another fluctuation hits Rosetsu's senses. This time, it's a cry for help from the Crimson Tree, telling Rosetsu that Nobara and Rindo have begun a battle with its final guardian in its innermost sanctum. And this alarm is one Rosetsu cannot ignore. Growing extremely frustrated at the fact they were able to just walk right past the king's vessel, who we know clearly just outright abandoned its post for some reason. But Rosetsu does not. So while he's distracted again, he slips up and falls into another one of Yuji's combos, getting dealt a heavy blow and getting pushed back. Rosetsu is beginning to grow angry that despite taking every precaution, all of his advantages are falling apart right at the end. He refuses to accept this though, and instead decides that he needs to take Yuji out as soon as possible so he can return to the cornerstone side. And as he begins to charge up more power, the sudden influx of strength immediately tips Yuji off that something has happened elsewhere that's making Rosetsu grow desperate. Back inside the tree, Rindo and Nobara are feeling the effects of exhaustion set in from all of their previous battles, fighting their absolute hardest against the cursed ogre defending Yuki. Unfortunately though, neither of them can really amass enough cursed energy to effectively damage the ogre's outer shell, which forces them on the back foot and gets them to lose ground and take damage. However, now faced with no other option, Rindo and Nobara lock eyes with one another, deciding it's time to put quote-unquote that to the test. The two girls instantly synchronize their movements, springing into different directions so the ogre can't keep track. Taking the last of her remaining nails, Nobara uses all of her strength to scatter them throughout the air and all around the ogre. At the same time, Rindo increases her speed, beginning to punch as many of the nails as she can deep into the ogre, puncturing the skin and lodging them further and further into its body. And just as the ogre attempts to counter, Rindo gives up the volley and jumps out of the way, yelling at Nobara to hit it, which signals Nobara to strike what might be her most aura-fueled pose in the entire series, which is crazy that it's in a mobile game. But as she lifts her hand up, Nobara snaps her fingers, activating Straw Doll Hairpin, which ignites every cursed nail that was stabbed into the ogre like a chain bomb, causing that hulking body to blow up with a spraying geyser of cursed energy, splitting it open from the inside out and exorcising it in one blast. Yet even though the battle's over, they can't celebrate because the war is far from done. Even with the cornerstone sanctum clear of enemies, the girls still need to find a way to save Yuki and break the cornerstone. But now with how out of gas the girls really are, no matter how hard they try to pull Yuki from his rooted prison, the tight hold the Crimson Tree has on its energy source seems impossible to break. And in this final hour, with every possible option being exhausted, it's finally now when the hopelessness begins to set in, making Nobara and Rindo wonder if they really struggled all this way for nothing. However, the two are surprisingly interrupted by the arrival of former principal Kensuke Nagino, who wanders into the sanctum and stands between them out of nowhere. Beyond confused, Rindo demands to know why Nagino would show his face here, but despite her constant attempts to hound and interrogate him, Nagino stands there silently, staring at his former student Yuki up above in the roots. Choosing to ignore the girls and instead walk right past them, Nagino begins to speak quietly, as if almost to himself. Nagino explains that because prayer formation technique has the ability to create multiple different layers all within what is technically one barrier, there must be an additional type of veil placed over Yuki that's resistant to outside attacks. And sure, this kind of barrier can normally not be destroyed by external force, but there has to be some kind of weak spot placed outside of the barrier for equivalent exchange purposes. Nagino, thinking back to a time before all of this happened, he remembers when Yuki was just learning how to use this cursed technique. Yuki consulted Nagino about where would be the best place to hide such a weak point, and Nagino did his best to try and tell Yuki not to ever reveal the location of that to anyone, not even to him, and to pick his own, as once chosen, it can never be changed. Despite this, Yuki still begged his sensei for advice on where to place it, claiming he would just change it after he got the idea. To which Nagino hesitantly obliged. And closing his eyes and sighing, Nagino says out loud what he told Yuki all that time ago. On the side of the barrier, somewhere within reach of the user's dominant hand. In one swipe, suddenly, the barrier around Yuki shatters. The realization that his former pupil still chose the location Nagino gave him, even after he told Yuki not to trust him, just makes Nagino even more sad than he already was. Reaching into the roots and plucking Yuki from his prison, Nagino returns to Rindo and Nobara, placing the boy's unconscious body beside them, claiming, unfortunately, that's the only real kind of help he can offer at this point. And as he stands, beginning to make his way out of the sanctum, Saki Rindo continues to yell at him, screaming about why Nagino thinks he can just turn around and start helping them now, of all times. But all Nagino can do, again, is smile, turning to his former student and telling her not to lose, before he continues to make his way out of the cornerstone. Just before Rindo can chase after him though, Panda appears and stops her, saying it's probably best if she leaves Nagino be for the moment, especially since they still haven't finished taking care of the barrier. But in the final hallway, as Nagino exits, he begins to stumble and fall, almost dropping to the floor unconscious if his old friend Masamichi Yaga wasn't there to catch him. As Nagino's life begins to fade from his eyes, the former principal wonders if this is what happens when someone breaks a binding vow. As these two former allies share in their final moments, Nagino thinks back to his students, but especially back to his lover, Sarah. Yaga is upset, but Nagino admits this is as good of an ending as he could have ever asked for, especially after the choices he made. In the end, Nagino's happy, because now he's actually able to understand a little bit about how Sarah felt before she died. That feeling of caring about people so much you'd be willing to trade your own life for theirs. Even though he had to destroy his reputation to do it, at the very least, Nagino was able to help his students somewhat in the end. And as Nagino slips away, Yaga holds and comforts his friend until the end, reassuring Nagino that his sacrifice will not go in vain. Back outside the Crimson Tree, an almost hysterical, bordering on visceral madness Rosetsu begins roaring to the sky, cursing such a fool like Nagino for betraying him when all of Rosetsu's greatest dreams were almost in grasp. Yuji sees another opening while Rosetsu's distracted, but the irate special grade slashes Yuji out of range, demanding Sukuna's vessel to not get cocky. With Nagino's betrayal, the sorcerers now preparing to launch an attack on the cornerstone from within, and the fact that Rosetsu wasted all of his time getting the ingredients for the king's vessel just for it to be useless, all of this brings Rosetsu's emotions to boil. Rosetsu begins to spiral as everything he's planned for begins to crumble before his eyes, coming to a crossroads, before suddenly the atmosphere of the entire barrier begins to grow silent. With all eyes focused on Rosetsu, time seems to stop almost entirely, all of his stress popping But the cursed spirit instead takes one last second to deep inhale, recomposing himself, and then exhaling. In another location of the barrier, during this sinister pause, just outside of the Crimson Tree, Megami has finally managed to pull himself to the cornerstone despite his fatigue. Unfortunately, unlike Nobara and Rindo, when Megami arrives, the outer throne is not empty, and he finds himself face to face with the king's vessel, whose toxic miasma begins to exert itself over the young sorcerer. Out of pure fear and a realization there's no way he can put up a fight against this type of enemy, Megami opts to resorting to use that, which is, you know, obviously Maharaga, noting that even if he gets taken out in the process, its power should at least be enough to destroy the barrier's cornerstone and finish the mission as well. However, despite all of this caution and emergency planning, right as all of this tension reaches its peak, the king's vessel merely chuckles to itself and, before long, ultimately turns to make its leave without a single word or action, leaving Megami utterly bewildered and confused, but seeing no other option but to accept this random bit of luck, begins to head inside the Crimson Tree with the last of his strength to go help his friends. And getting back to Yuji, Rosetsu's mood takes a sudden change after this breath, the curse going from absolutely infuriated to pure happiness and joy in a second, leaving Yuji speechless as Rosetsu begins to release echoes of laughter that carry throughout the entire domain. As not too long after, the Grand Kyushu's barrier begins to surge and expand once more, finally achieving its third and almost complete state, something that can be felt by every sorcerer all over, even inside the Crimson Tree's core, as in that exact moment, the toxic miasma of the inner sanctum becomes so heavy and dense, Nobara, Rindo, and even Yaga are unable to withstand its pressure. All of their cornerstone shards shattering at once under the atmosphere. And because Panda is the only one who doesn't technically meet the criteria's barrier against humans, he is the only one left standing in the tree's core. And soon enough, he is overwhelmingly surrounded by buffed cursed minions. Meanwhile, the cornerstone itself's veil has become so powerful, its concentrated curse energy is enough to obliterate anything that comes into contact with it, putting Panda in an unwinnable situation. As everything comes to a head at once, Yuji realizes this random outburst from Rosetsu is more than misplaced confidence, who now, with full intentions of killing Yuji, calls back every minion that he spread across Kyushu besides the one inside the tree, reducing all of them down to base cursed energy and drawing all of that in to reveal every single curse Rosetsu creates is merely just an extension of his own base power. And by returning all of those minions to their source, Rosetsu can return to his true form and awaken his ultimate power. But as this process is going on, suddenly, Rosetsu finds himself interrupted by the arrival of the king's vessel. Confused as to why it would show up now of all times, it's almost as if the king's vessel stood there in pure defiance of everything Rosetsu stood for. But the special grade decides not to worry, telling the king's vessel if it doesn't want to follow orders, it too can return to him and become absorbed, which only serves to boost Rosetsu's quote-unquote perfect form significantly in strength, due to the addition of 2 Sukuna fingers worth of energy, mutating Rosetsu beyond his normal appearance and shifting his shape into a more monstrous, larger size that emanates an extreme level of aura, making Yuji believe this kind of curse breaks the scale of anything he's ever faced before, wondering to himself if it's even possible to exercise a special grade curse of this category. Unfortunately though, Yuji doesn't seem to have much choice in the matter, as once Rosetsu's transformation completes, he sets his sights on Itadori solely, calling Yuji his final entertainment before Rosetsu claims his spot at the top of existence, calling the death of Sukuna's vessel the torchlighting that will celebrate the end to all of humanity. Meanwhile, as all things seem to reach an inevitable end, miraculously, inside the cornerstone, Kaito Yuki begins to awake, regaining consciousness after being separated from the tree's roots. Realizing that Panda is the only one left fighting, Yuki snaps to quickly, getting back to his feet. Panda is relieved, however, that relief would quickly fade once Yuki fully grasped the situation and saw everyone unconscious, realizing that none of this would have happened if he didn't get caught. Seeing no way out, Yuki turns to Panda and, out of guilt, requests that Panda kill him, not just to atone, but to end everything once and for all. Almost too similar to how Sarah Kozuki lost her life. Suddenly, Yaga regains consciousness, yelling at Yuki to never talk like that, as there needs to be some other way to stop all of this. Yaga refusing to let two people Nagino loved lose their lives because of Rosetsu. With no other solution in sight though, all of the sorcerers are at a complete loss. That is, until Fushiguro Megami slumps his barely limping body into the inner sanctum at that moment, surprising everyone at the terrible state he was able to travel in. Unfortunately, Megami loses consciousness right as he wanders inside, but he does manage to make out one sentence that explains to Yuki he can still take control of the barrier from Rosetsu. The information is incomplete though, and although vague, it is enough to re-inspire Yaga and Panda to keep fighting the minions and protect Yuki, telling him to stop and think about what Megami meant by take back control. As Yuki looks down unsure of himself, Yaga calls back and reminds him that Itadori is also probably out there fighting somewhere, facing off against Rosetsu, telling him this is their last shot to end it all. And just as Yaga claimed, Yuji is giving it his all in this battle against perfect Rosetsu. However, the student is absolutely overwhelmed and getting utterly decimated under the weight of Rosetsu's blows. Rosetsu is continually beating Itadori down, telling the boy it's best if he simply stops struggling and just accepts his loss, as the world Rosetsu envisioned is already coming true. And now that Rosetsu has the chance to brag again, he definitely does, claiming even if it takes him generation after generation, he does not care how many humans he needs to go through. In this new world of curses, all humans will exist as livestock to be harvested in order to manufacture and craft the ultimate curse technique, forcing the slaves to procreate, compare genetics, and procreate again, raising the children under constant torture and making them live under continuous duress to ensure they've harnessed the purest of negative energies, refusing to cease until all cursed energy and power has been stolen by Rosetsu. And while the curse monologues, Yuki is left to rack his brain as quickly as possible to decipher this code Fushiguro left for him. But it isn't until Yuki puts together why he, like Panda, is also unaffected by the barrier's miasma that he discovers exactly what Megami was trying to tell him. Yuki can take control of the barrier back, literally, because it's his technique. The technique does not affect its user, and if Yuki's not being drained by its toxins, he must be able to reach out and touch the cornerstone and regain dominance over the Grand Barrier. However, when saying this, Yaga and Panda try to remind Yuki that its current defense system might obliterate him on contact, as Panda almost lost his own arm trying to push through the shield. However, ignoring their warnings, Yuki resolves himself, making a break for the cornerstone and throwing his body into the torrent of cursed energy, thinking that if Yuji can risk his life, he should be able to do it too. Forcing his hand through the barrier's extreme defenses, he refuses to let the pain and harm dissuade him, declaring aloud that he will become a Jujutsu sorcerer just as capable as Itadori, stealing his emotions as Yuki begins to pierce the cornerstone's barrier. Simultaneously, Yuji is once again getting smacked around by Rosetsu, and the curse's arrogant personality begins to take over again. He wonders if he was too hasty dissolving the king's vessel into energy, and that maybe if he keeps Yuji alive, he can try and remake the king's vessel at some point in the future. As Rosetsu ponders and muses to himself, the fallen Yuji slowly begins to drift out of consciousness, blinking and finding himself awakened actually inside of Sukuna's domain. Unable to explain why he's ended up here, he looks up to see the King of Curses exactly where he always is, atop the domain's throne. Unsure if this is some type of afterlife, Yuji asks Sukuna what the two of them are even doing here, and as if completely ignoring the question, Sukuna just admits it's quite boring to see the boy so narrowly escape death in such a convenient way, which only serves to confuse Yuji, who, by the next time he blinks, finds himself again back inside of the Kyushu barrier, standing off against Rosetsu. Back just where he was before Rosetsu finished his monologue, the curse laughs to itself as he watches Itadori pick himself back up, asking just what Yuji could possibly manage to do now, when, like clockwork, the light of the barrier as a whole changes in one flash, Suddenly, in an instant, all of the domain's color and environment shift in tone. Immediately, all of the momentum inside of this domain switches, which leaves Rosetsu stunned, and Yuji, whose wounds begin to heal and stamina returns, recognizes this familiar feeling of support flowing through him. Getting back into his fighting stance, Yuji knows what this is, thanking his friend Kaito Yuki. Knowing wherever Yuki is now, he's out there fighting just like Yuji is. And with that thought reassuring him, bringing Yuji back to 100%, Yuji once again reminds Rosetsu he will be the one to kill him. And left dumbfounded that his domain was able to be overwritten, Rosetsu is in complete disbelief, shouting how this could be possible, that he did everything right, and there's no way he could be losing after coming this close. But with the reversal of roles, Rosetsu is now unable to keep up with Itadori's strikes and combos, forcing the special grade's life to flash before its eyes, wondering where in all of the numerous pathways and choices that were made did Rosetsu possibly make the mistake that led to this outcome. And Yuji begins to enter the zone, his punches against Rosetsu switching into black flashes, utterly decimating the curse from the damage and choking it up. And as the curse loses grip on life, Rosetsu asks Yuji what he ever did to make him stand in Rosetsu's way. And as Yuji charges up his final punch, this last breather Yuji takes to answer Rosetsu's question. Why is Yuji standing in Rosetsu's way? Well, because he's a curse spirit, and Yuji's a Jujutsu sorcerer. That's all there will ever be to it. And in that moment, the decisive strike lands, eviscerating Rosetsu in one final blow and scattering his cursed core into multiple pieces, eliminating the special grade curse for good, as so too does the crimson tree of the Grand Barrier begin to fade and wither away. As all of the veils dissipate, revealing the actual night sky above, Yuji collapses on his back, wondering if it's really okay to rest now, since everything's all said and done. Yuji drifts off and officially loses consciousness for good. Sometime after, Yuji wakes up in Oita's Jujutsu precinct. His brother, Aoi Todo, is the first face he sees, making his best friend extremely happy that Yuji was able to recover. Yuji asks if they really won, and Todo confirms this, reassuring that his brother has successfully exorcised Rosetsu, and the Grand Kyushu barrier was stopped. Despite collateral damage to the city, and unfortunately the injuring of multiple civilians, luckily there weren't at least any deaths, and life in Fukuoka will begin to return to normal before it knows. Especially thanks to Ichichi spreading the fake news of a freak gas leak as well as a potential volcano eruption. Most of the locals were more than willing to evacuate, and thankfully probably won't have many questions to ask about what occurred in the area. With Yuji confirmed safe, Todo says it's time he also makes his leave, as all of the other Kyoto students have already left, and only he refused to leave without confirming Yuji's status. Yuji's glad Todo was able to be here, thanking him for somehow always being there when Yuji needs him most. But Todo reminds Yuji that they're bound together by fate and that their souls will always lead them towards each other during their most fierce of battles. Using actual logic and reason, Yuji tries to remind Todo he was only here because of an idol concert, but Todo laughs that off, claiming that, if anything, it's even more proof the universe will always find a way to bring them together. And with all of that out of the way, Yuji asks Yaga if he's able to visit Yuki, since they're going to be leaving Fukuoka soon. But much to Ichichi and Yaga's hesitation to tell him, they see no other way but to admit to Itadori they're not sure if Yuki will ever wake up, revealing that once the barrier fell, Yuki entered a comatose state that none of the Jujutsu doctors are sure if he'll ever recover from, which terrifies Yuji at the thought and makes him severely depressed. Meanwhile, in another location of Oita, Nobara comforts Rindo as she mourns the loss of her former principal Nagino. With Nobara leaving Fukuoka to head back to Tokyo, she wonders just what Rindo plans to do now, with Fukuoka surely set for dissolvement after this. And Rindo admits that despite Fukuoka's school closing, she won't be leaving the area anytime soon, admitting there will always be curses to exercise and missions to handle that she can participate and help out with. Rindo says even though she's not quite sure what her sensei meant in the end, or what he might have even been thinking and feeling, she can at least hold on to the promise she made to never lose. Claiming that she's going to be doing such great things over here, they'll have no choice but to acknowledge Rindo all the way from Tokyo, making Nobara more than happy to hear that her friend has already moved on, admitting she wouldn't forgive Rindo for choosing to go any other way. Both of the girls promising to remain friends and always do their best. Sometime later or before, deep within the mountain range of Kyushu, tiny fragments of what used to be a curse begin to pull themselves together and reform. Humiliated and defeated, the reshaped and extremely weakened Rosetsu emerges, having just barely survived everything at the last minute. Annoyed that he's going to have to start everything over from scratch, Rosetsu is at least relieved he'll be able to survive and start recovering, especially since he was somehow able to remove and hold on to Sukuna's fingers, knowing that as long as he has these, another grand barrier can't be that far off from creation. However, just then, Rosetsu hears someone call out behind him, making the curse shudder in fear, only to be extremely relieved when he sees the person sneaking up on him is just Mahito, recognizing this curse as one of Kenjaku's allies. Mahito mockingly congratulates Rosetsu on such a spectacular loss, and since he's in no position to really argue right now, Rosetsu simply takes the bullying, merely happy to see luck is still on his side and thankful he encountered a friend during this escape. But hearing this confuses Mahito, who starts to laugh when he realizes Rosetsu hasn't caught on to what's happening yet. He corrects the curse and tells Rosetsu that he's not here to help. He's only come to collect what they had so politely lent to Rosetsu in the first place, since Geto doesn't believe in second chances, you know? This makes Rosetsu panic, knowing the Sukuna fingers are the only hope he has left of returning to adequate power. He immediately runs away with his tail between his legs, splitting off into multiple curse residuals and trying to hide amongst the fragments, just like he's done so many times before to fake his death. Unfortunately for Rosetsu, this time, he's faced with a foe who can see right through this facade. Mahito able to simply find Rosetsu's soul amongst all of these clouds, instantly picking out Rosetsu's essence from the miasma and grabbing onto his head, making him reform against Rosetsu's will inside of Mahito's grasp, acting as one last nail in the coffin for Rosetsu, whose tried and trusted escape plan, the very same that's allowed him to weasel his way across multiple generations, has finally failed him. As the curse quivers, trembling in fear, unable to even utter a word in Mahito's presence, the curse born from humanity's hatred places a smiling head next to Rosetsu's, letting him in on the little secret that no matter what, the price of using Sukuna's fingers was always going to be his life. Rosetsu's final moments filled with pure horror as he tries to scream, but idle transfiguration destroys the curse's body and soul beyond recognition before a sound can even escape the curse's mouth. Meeting back up with Kenjaku afterward, Mahito returns to Sukuna fingers before asking why Kenjaku didn't just want to absorb Rosetsu for a future plan. But according to Kenjaku, while curse technique snatch can be impactful, it's mostly useless for what they have planned next, as Rosetsu's already given them everything they needed, revealing that Kenjaku's ultimate goal out of all of this was the blueprint for a complex barrier that housed multiple layers, each with their own conditions and traits, which is the exact project that he and the disaster curses will be using to commit the Shibuya incident later on in October. A great way of tying this mobile game into the grand canon as a whole. Meanwhile, at some other random unknown time, amongst an all-white void of emptiness, a confused Kaito Yuki begins to awake, wondering if this place he's found himself in is the afterlife. However, even if this is the case, Yuki admits he's more than willing to accept this fate and take accountability for the mistakes he's made. Surprisingly though, Yuki realizes he isn't alone in this void, and that there's someone else staring at him far off into the distance. Squinting, it's almost as if this person was reaching out to him, and even though he doesn't know who it is, it's clear this image he's seeing is of Sarah Kozuki, Nagino's late wife. Sarah's hand grabs onto Yuki and begins to pull him from the abyss. And Yuki, confused, tries to ask the person to wait and why aren't they coming with him before everything goes black. The very next day, the Tokyo Jujutsu trio wait at the bus stop for a shuttle to take them back to the airport. The three of them trying their best to bid farewell to Rindo, who is just bawling her eyes out beyond belief and isn't hiding the fact she just wants Nobara to stay. As Nobara does her best to smack some sense into Rindo, Megami is trying to rush everyone onto the shuttle so they can stop procrastinating. congratulating, which makes Yuji upset since he won't be able to see Yuki off before he wakes up. But like clockwork, a familiar voice calls out to the trio just before they board their bus, revealing Kaito Yuki had just woken up from his coma in time to see his new friends off. Everyone's surprised since they thought Yuki would never be able to wake up, and Yuki admits he thought so too. However, for some unknown reason, he regained consciousness with next to no side effects. Now that they can actually say goodbye, Yuki takes this chance to formally thank Yuji, admitting that he never would have found the courage to take control of Rosetsu's barrier if Yuji never inspired him, which parallels their very first battle at the beginning of this story, because Yuji smirks and throws it right back to Yuki that if he never took control of the barrier, Yuji never would have been able to beat Rosetsu. But instead of last time, where Yuki chose to beat himself up and feel all woe is me, Yuki admits that before, when he was just working for Nagino, he had no real purpose as a sorcerer. Following laws were the only thing that made Yuki feel grounded. But after he met Yuji, Yuki knows that's not at all what a real Jujutsu sorcerer is. Following laws means nothing in the face of exercising curses. And what really makes a Jujutsu sorcerer is having the courage to keep fighting no matter what the circumstances are. Yuki promises he'll never forget that lesson, holding on to that conviction and declaring he'll one day become a Jujutsu sorcerer just as capable as Yuji. Because the one thing Yuki never wants to do is die with regrets. A quote that catches Yuji off guard, but at the same time puts the biggest of smiles on his face, admitting Yuji's got quite the reputation to uphold now, if that's how Yuki feels. The two friends shaking hands and acknowledging one another's philosophy. Two people who started this journey off as enemies, vowing to do their best and promising to see each other soon, and ending this journey as friends. As the Tokyo trio re-arrive at home, they're met at their destination by their sensei Gojo, who's more than excited to hear all about their mission and how they managed to exercise another special grade. But the students aren't stupid and they cut right through Gojo's crap, asking him why he's really here. And the honored one can't lie. He admits, other than triumphantly congratulating his students, he's actually here to accept the souvenirs they so obviously got for Gojo on their trip, which makes everyone speechless because they realize that amongst everything they did, in fact, forget to bring the now very sad Gojo Sensei his souvenirs. And that is all she wrote. The end of Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade, an amazing mobile game that had no right to have a story as good as it was. At least until they decide to cook up some kind of season 2 for it.